So, the video we did on the Z31 has been doing very well, and we thought it'd be a great idea to put together a buyer's guide for the car since there really isn't too much useful information compiled into one video. While there are many great resources out there, this video should give a substantial deal of info for someone looking to buy a car and determine major changes made throughout the years. Seriously, this is a no bullshit video and should provide you with what you're looking for. With that being said, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you aren't subscribed already, hit that bell, because we'll begin to work on guides for other chassis we're familiar with. Big disclaimer, we've attempted to fact check this information as best as we could, but there's always the possibility information may be slightly off. Feel free to comment and correct any errors, as we'd prefer the criticism to ensure that any potential buyer has the best information possible. Anyone looking to purchase a Z should do as much research as possible. Do not take this video for your sole source of information. To begin, the Z31 300ZX was released in 1984 and produced for 6 model years, concluding in 1989. A total of 270,143 Z31s were produced and can be found for relatively cheap. Lesser desirable models can dip below the $5,000 mark, while the highest tier cars still remain affordable and sit between $10,000 and $15,000. We'll see how well that ages. The Z came in 2 distinct chassis types with 2 distinct models to choose from. The first chassis type was the 2+0. The 2+0 was the more desirable of the 2 chassis types and what most people are familiar with when they think of a Z. Simply put, the 2+0 is a 2-seater with 0 back seats. The second of the 2 chassis types was the 2+2. This version offered rear seats at the cost of extending the overall length of the car by about 8 inches. 2+2s can be easily identified by a non-triangular quarter panel glass or by the presence of the rear seats. An important note for the 2+2 models about the back seats is the fact that they will not comfortably seat anyone other than children. The space for the rear seats is extremely small, and I can say this with certainty as I've attempted to sit in them. Major models / engine note. The 2 major models for the Z were the NA and turbo versions of the cars. NA cars came with Nissan's VG30E, a single overhead cam 3-liter V6 that put out a crazy 160 advertised horsepower with a massive bump of 5 horsepower when Nissan updated the VG in 1988. The turbo models came with a VG30 ET, an advertised 200 horsepower and gargantuan 5 horsepower jump when Nissan updated the engine's turbo in May of 1987. We'll cover more on this update later. All turbo models came with turbo badging, a special rear spoiler, and electronically adjustable shocks that could be set to soft, normal, or firm. From my experience, firm is the only setting that feels good if you find a car that still has functioning shocks. Turbo 2+2s were not available in the US, but were available in Canada. The VG30, whether NA or turbocharged, is an extremely robust and reliable engine. The stock bottom end record is somewhere over 650 wheel horsepower. While all engines fail eventually for one reason or another, not many complain about the VG as long as proper maintenance is addressed. One of the most major maintenance items for the VG30 is its timing belt, as the VG is an interference engine. You'll definitely want to ensure that this belt was replaced, and it's best to replace it if you question it at all. Trim options. 2 major trim options were offered for the Z, with a third option offered in Canada. This third option was the SF model and sits at the bottom of the list. SFs were the base model for Canada and offered with no power options besides power steering. T-tops were optional on Z31s, with many choosing them over the rare slick top versions of the car. Moving to the US, the base trim was the GL, which offered many pleasant standard options such as cruise control, AC, tilt steering wheel, an AM/FM radio with no equalizer, power windows, and mirrors. Cloth seats and analog dashes were standard, and the GLs also had more interior color options than the highest trim, which was the GLL. The GLL offered some upgrades over the GL. Upon the Z31's launch, the GLL had standard options such as the iconic green lit Z31 digital dash, power leather seats, automatic climate control, and headlight washers. We'd like to note that this digital dash, while a crazy piece of art, can be slow to respond. Like I said in the first Z video, I rode around in a DigiDash Z before buying mine and noticed the delay. Not every car may be like this, but it's a consideration to make and something we'd like to mention. Some significant changes were made to the trim options through the years, which will be covered as we go over every model year. Before diving into the first year of the Z31, we'd like to mention that we're covering US manual models only. There's a minimal interest in auto cars, with many being converted to manual. JDM Z31s are also a whole different realm. There are many interesting Z31 models that stayed in Japan that came with VG20s instead of 30s, and even an RB20 DET. 1984. 1984 was the first year of the Z31 Zenki models, which included the 84 and 85 model years. A neat piece of the 84 cars was that they were the only year a Datsun emblem was badged with the car on the car's hatch. Zenki models and the 1986 Chuki model featured a heavy wedge-shaped design with large taillights and black bumpers on the 84 and 85 models. The analog dash for the early cars was completely orange, while the digital dashes remained green through the Z31's lifespan. The NA cars came with a 5-speed FS5 W71C transmission that could be found in the 240SX. This transmission was one of 3 used for the Zs and is considered the second strongest of the 3. The 71C transmission remained in all NA cars through every model year. The 84 NA cars were also given a 3.7-to-1 open diff. All of the early cars had 4-lug hubs, which are a downside to the Zenkis. Many opt to swap to a 5-lug setup featured on later model cars. 1984 turbos were fitted with a Garrett T3 turbo, which most prefer over the Garrett T25 that was used in the later facelift/Kuki models. This turbo made around 8 psi of boost, while the later T25 only made around 4 from the factory. There was also a neat turbo cooling hood scoop that was included for the early models. However, the transmission paired for the early turbo cars has become a major pain to many owners. The FS5R90A, or commonly known as a Borg Warner T5, is the weakest of the 3 transmissions, with issues arising when minimal power is added. The diff for the turbo cars differed from NA with a 3.545-to-1 open diff. 1984 50th Anniversary Edition. 1984 marked the 50th anniversary of Nissan, which of course had them release a 50th anniversary edition of the Z. 5,148 US and 300 Canadian anniversary cars were produced and easily identified by the silver and black paint scheme, with several 50th anniversary markings found on the interior and exterior of the car. The AE was a turbo model that came with sought-after fender flares, side skirts, and minor adjustments to stiffen the suspension. Another noteworthy feature of the AE models was the Bodysonic sound system included with the seats, which would vibrate while playing music. You either like it or dislike it if you're looking for a Z31, and if you are interested in an AE model, there are many more quirky features to learn about. 1985. 1985 saw a coolant line being added to the turbo for turbo cars for increased reliability and modest modifications to the interior on GLLs. Stereo and cruise control functions were added to the steering wheel. The stereos received a 9-band equalizer and leather was now optional. 1986. The 1986 model year is designated as the Chuki for its minor facelift. Deep down, the car was essentially the same as the previous model years. A third taillight/brake light became mandatory on all cars in 1986, for which Nissan chose to add the turbo spoiler regardless of model specification. Gone was the turbo hood scoop from the previous years. Many people lean towards 86s if they're after a wedge-style Z31, as it's arguably the nicest looking of the 3 years. The black bumpers found on the 84 and 85 models were now paint-matched, and the 50th anniversary side skirts were added. Power seats became standard on GL turbos and optional on GL NAs. 1987. 1987 was the biggest year for model changes on the Z31. A large facelift occurred, which designated the 87 to 89 model years as Kuki cars. The Z31 was given a much more rounded look that is most noticeable in the front bumper design. The taillights were slimmed down to half the size of the old taillights with a much more modern look. The brake light was moved from the spoiler to the top of the hatch, which allowed for the spoiler to be once again reserved for the turbo models. Some trim options were adjusted, with cruise control now being optional on GL models. The digital dash and headlight washers became optional on the GLL, and all cars received a new white-faced analog dash instead of the previous orange one. The turbo cars were given major drivetrain changes that included the switch from the FS5R90A to the FS5R30A transmission. This transmission is the best of the three and can be found in the Z32 with changes to the gearing. The 30A was capable of handling plenty of power with no issues and is desired by Zenki and Chuki turbo owners as a good swap. The differential on the turbo cars was changed to a 3.7-to-1 clutch limited slip differential in April of 1987. This would be the first time a limited slip was available on any Z31. Another change for 1987 was the introduction of the W Series VG30 that began in April of 87. This engine was an improved version of the VG with additional water galleries and modifications to the crankshaft, connecting rods, pistons, and cylinder head. While these changes all sound great, the W Series isn't a huge leap over the original VG30. We wouldn't consider it a factor if you're looking to purchase a Z, as either VG is outstanding. The W Series is just a hair different from the previous VG, like I said in the first video. 1988. 1988 only had two significant changes made to the Z. The first being that the differential gearing was changed from 3.7-to-1 to 3.9-to-1 on the NA cars. Change number 2 was the switch to the Garrett T25 mentioned previously in May of 87. Neither the T25 or the T3 are considered bad turbos, but the T3 is more desirable. A common swap for the T25 cars is a T3/T4 turbo swap in order to make more boost. 1988 Shiro Special. Besides the 1984 50th anniversary Z, there was one other special edition model that was released, which was the 1988 Shiro Special. The Shiro Special was a promotional sales attempt that was essentially a driver-focused version of the Z31 Turbo. 1,002 cars were produced, with all of them having pearl white paint with white wheels, T-tops, and a noticeably larger air dam. The cars lost the power leather seats in favor of Shiro-only Recaro cloth seats. All cars also came with a 5-speed, analog dash, and manual climate controls to maximize weight savings for a 125-pound deficit. The suspension was revised to have higher rate springs, thicker sway bars, and non-adjustable shocks despite being a turbo model. The differential was changed to a 3.7-to-1 viscous limited slip instead of the clutch LSD found in the kooky turbo cars. The differential is the weakest component of the Shiro, as many dislike its performance compared to the clutch LSDs. Other than the differential, for the OEM Plus people out there, Shiro parts are highly desirable and come at quite a cost when available. 1989. 1989 was the last year of the Z31 with less than 5,000 units being produced. No significant changes were made coming off of the 1988 model, but it's very uncommon to see 1989 cars. The Shiro Special pearl white paint was now offered for this year. With its low production numbers, 1989 Z31s are viewed as quite collectible. Now that we've covered all of the model years, we'd like to show this chart highlighting the key changes we've covered. If you'd like, pause and analyze this chart to come to your own conclusion on what the quote-unquote best spec Z31 is. Our take. We believe that the best Z31 Turbo to buy, as long as you're buying something that hasn't been heavily modified, are the kooky cars. Unless you're in love with the wedge shape of the first 3 model years, the kookies come with the best transmission and a limited slip differential. Be careful and do your research, as the limited slip was introduced later into the 1987 model year. It is possible to buy a 1987 with an open diff, though it may be possible to secure an April of 87 car that has a limited slip and a T3 turbo before they made the switch to the T25 in May. Don't hold your breath waiting for one of these to come around, as it's such a slim margin if they even exist. In all honesty, we aren't quite sure because we've never seen one. I personally bought a 1988 GLL Turbo 5-speed car with the analog dash and cloth interior. I was actually a fan of the more rounded kooky cars over the wedge Zenki and Chuki cars, and highly preferred to have the limited slip and 30A transmission. The cloth interior and analog dash were also a preference, since I liked the look of the cloth seats more and had the experience with the digital dash. Though my car has the T25 turbo, the boost can still be up for fun power in spite of the T3 being considered the more desirable turbo. The NA cars, on the other hand, are a completely open game. They're all extremely similar to each other with the 71C transmission and open diff. Some may prefer the 88 Plus cars for their differential gearing change and W Series VG, but those changes are very negligible. If you're in the market for an NA car, your choice may be determined solely by the exterior and interior looks of the car rather than drivetrain changes. Common issues. Before wrapping up, we'd like to cover some of the woes of the Z31. While there are plenty of various issues people encounter, we want to share some we've come across and some issues present on all cars. The first major issue with the Z is its suspension setup. For the longest time, the rear trailing arm suspension has caused many headaches for those trying to lower the car. Aggressive camber can be seen on many lowered Zs in the rear wheels with no bolt-on methods of resolving this until Apex Engineered released the rear subframe kit earlier this year. Absolutely zero adjustment could be made for the rear wheels, and owners were stuck with whatever alignment they had. The only practical solution to this issue before the Apex kit was the very popular S13 rear subframe swap. With a little bit of fabrication, the S13 subframe could be installed, which allowed for complete rear suspension adjustment. This swap is still extremely effective and affordable for those looking to upgrade. On top of this suspension issue, the Z's wheels are tucked into the car over an inch. Large spacers are a common first mod to make the car's stance look normal. In combination with spacers, the tension arm bushings are an ordinary replacement on these cars. The next major issue is the lack of intercooler kits for the Z. CX Racing is currently the only company offering an intercooler kit, but it's a V mount that requires the AC to be deleted or moved if possible. What is possible is a front mount intercooler setup that keeps the AC, with many examples online of people achieving this. Would it be too crazy for a company to offer a front mount intercooler kit that keeps the AC? We hope not, as there is a high demand for it instead of having people custom make their setups. The next thing we'd like to point out is the oil filter location. The oil filter on the VG30 is right above the starter with nothing to stop oil from flowing onto the starter. When doing oil changes, be sure to put a bag or something similar to prevent oil from drenching your starter. Another common problem is the quarter glass seal failing, causing water to accumulate and rust out the inside of your car. There's a decent video or two on YouTube about resealing glass, which isn't difficult at all. If you need to replace the quarter glass seal, there's a good chance other seals have failed as well. Be sure to keep an eye on the condition of them. We've also heard of water pumps failing and alternators going out, but that's all to be expected from a 30-some-year-old vehicle. As mentioned before, similar to the timing belt, be sure to keep up on your maintenance, and these cars should treat you very well. The only issue with this is sourcing parts at times. Being the forgotten Z, it can be difficult to source the parts you need. Fortunately, many major components can be found on dedicated Z31 sites, eBay, Facebook groups, or even the junkyard if you have to go that far. Be mindful of this, as this is still why the Z is an unpopular choice for enthusiasts. Many do not want to deal with the resourcefulness required to maintain and upgrade these vehicles at times compared to much more popular chassis with thousands of parts available. Conclusion. Overall, the Z31 is a great choice for a dedicated enthusiast willing to go the extra mile to maintain and upgrade an extremely unique car. The VG30 is an excellent platform to work off of, and the quote-unquote best models such as my Z can be turned into super fun street or track cars without too much effort. Otherwise, if you're looking for an old school or classic to drive around on the weekends for cars and coffee, the Z should have no issues bringing you the joy you're after. The stock suspension is rather comfortable and makes for a great touring car/cruiser. When I bought my car, I drove it home across the country on a 28-hour drive with no issues. Hopefully this video helps anyone in search of a Z31 come to a smart decision on their purchase. There's definitely more to learn, and we'd like to thank the website xenonzcar.com for providing a great amount of information for this video. I spent a lot of time on this website before buying my Z. It is awesome. If you're looking for more info on the Z31, that website should have what you need. If not, comment any questions you have and we'll do our best to answer them. Thanks for making it all the way through, and have a good one.